How much do we really know about the books we love? Any bibliophile will tell you a book, especially a rare old book, is more than its words. It's an encounter with history. What lives made this dear old friend possible? No, really, what lives? What literal human lives?
Take a look, it's in a book.
But don't take my word for it. Hello from my parents' house. Dad? Darling, you had one instruction. Not to be banging around while your daughter was filming.
I didn't make that much noise.
That's not what the camera says. Everyone say hi to my dad. This is the poet, Phillis Wheatley. Phillis was born in Africa in 1753 and was sold into slavery when she was 7 and brought to America. While enslaved to the Wheatley family in Boston, she learned to read and write, publishing poems on various subjects, religious and moral, at age 20. Phillis was quite a good writer, a prodigy of sorts. Voltaire and George Washington were fans. I'd like to think she'd be extremely popular on Gen Z poetry Instagram today, but in 1772, she was put before a panel of esteemed white man poetry experts and forced to prove she had, in fact, actually written her own book of poems. The writing was far too elegant for an enslaved black woman to have written, they argued. Thankfully, the panel was convinced by Wheatley's abilities, and for a brief time her work was celebrated in literary circles. Wheatley was destined, eventually, to be recognized as the first African-American woman to publish a book of poetry. Such an influential one at that. But perhaps no one was quite as anxious to see that happen as German-born immigrant and Phillis Wheatley superfan 150 years later. George Hartman was a great admirer of Wheatley's work and couldn't bear to see her forgotten. Said Hartman,
"The literary work of her life is small, far too small."
An outspoken liberal and a book collector with an affinity for African-American works, he had several copies of Phillis's book printed on fancy Japanese vellum with ornate embellishment. Then he had them bound in human skin. Multiple copies. They still exist today, one at the University of Cincinnati and one at the Public Library of Cincinnati in Hamilton County. Hartman's goal with the whole skin thing was to increase the collectability of Wheatley's work and honor her talent, which I guess is one way to support your favorite creator. I don't know when you're picturing this taking place, but it's 1934.
Quick question, George. We love the support and energy. Living for what you've done here. Obsessed. But whose skin is that on the books?
Who exactly is it that's being flayed for book covers? A book bound with human skin is known in scholarly circles as
Anthropodermic bibliophagy.
If your mind goes directly to the sinister, the Necronomicon, Nazis making human lampshades, the victims of Ed Gein, you are not alone. Culture would have us think that someone binding a book in human skin has only the grimmest of intentions, pure evil and sorcery and nightmare fuel.
I am he who makest whole the glorious goal of Satan's unborn soul!
Let's begin with H.P. Lovecraft, who's now gonna get mentioned in every video, I guess. I used to want to name my future inevitable Pomeranian H.P. Lovecraft, and then there was the reckoning about what a racist he was, and though I firmly believe in nuanced teaching of the controversy, you don't want to be doing that in the dog park every day. It's like ultimately HP's racism was an eldritch, subconscious horror of the other, stemming from his own deep failures to obtain work while living in Brooklyn that Oh, excuse me. Fluffcraft? Fluffcraft, did you make a poopy? Okay, mommy's coming. Sorry. Lovecraft first introduced the Necronomicon, the now famous occult grimoire, or magical textbook, in his 1929 short story, The Hound. Then his History of the Necronomicon was published posthumously in 1938. It tells the lineage of this book written by an Abdul Ahazred, a mad poet of Sana'a in Yemen, circa 700 BCE. A text so horrifying and powerful, it was banned by the Pope.
Don't read it.
The fictional Al-Hazred was a worshipper of Cthulhu and summoner of dark deities, who was supposedly seized by madness and killed by invisible demons in broad daylight. His Necronomicon was translated from Arabic into Greek, Latin, and English, with copies finding their way into the British Museum, where it had to be kept under lock and key, the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and university libraries, including America's very own Harvard University. Lovecraft described the book as rigidly suppressed, because reading it leads to terrible consequences. But despite the Necronomicon's dark reputation, Lovecraft never said anything about his creation being bound in human skin. That was for the fans and other writers to fabulate, like Necronomicon fanfic. The Necronomicon, being a skin book connection, was definitively forged by folks like Stephen King and writer and director Sam Raimi. Raimi's Evil Dead movies are probably most responsible for planting the human skin book in our collective contemporary consciousness.
Necronomicon ex mortis, roughly translated, Book of the Dead.
In the movies, the Necronomicon ex mortis is a book bound in human skin that will summon demons and serve as a gateway to hell. The movies feature the character of Ash Williams, played by Bruce Campbell, battling the book and the ghoulish havoc that ensues when incantations are recited from the text.
Klaatu, Marada,
Cabins in the woods, possession, medieval time travel, damn it, chainsaw buddy. So much can go wrong when a book is bound in human skin. The Necronomicon is visually portrayed here as this gnarly, stitched human face, flesh thing that best belongs on a dark altar. Slightly less sinister, but I would argue equally influential, the spellbook from Hocus Pocus.
Looking for this?
But real human skin books, if we're talking real human skin books, well, between you and me, they look like normal books. Just 100% normal books.
Shut up!
Although their ordinariness may mean they're hiding in plain sight on your bookshelf right now. No, they're not. Shall we see some? I headed to the Historical Medical Library at the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, also known as the Mutter Museum. It's home to the world's largest collection of confirmed human skin books, which is 5.
I'm Heidi, Director of the Historical Medical Library.
When the books are shown to the public, what's the reaction? Do they expect them to look more sinister?
Well, each person's reaction is unique, but frequently we hear, oh, I thought they'd be fully bound in human skin, not just partially bound, which is also known as quarter bound. Or, wow, I'd never know this was human skin unless I looked closely and started to see the pores. And then as they look closely, they see how the pattern matches their own skin, often looking at the back of their hand for comparison. And suddenly it becomes really immediate. Oh, this is a human. This is part of someone's experience of being human.
Can I touch one?
Yes, it's okay to touch them, but very important, have you washed your hands?
Surprisingly, best practices say that you shouldn't wear gloves when touching these books. The biggest surprise is how much it looks like the flesh on my own thigh. I think you're now starting to get the large gap of pop culture expectation versus reality on these books. let me share with you what I think is the best example of this separation. The Huntington Library in Los Angeles has two alleged human skin items. One is a little dull, to be honest. It's a skin book from 1937, and it's called Anatomy, Epitomized and Illustrated. The other has a hideous pedigree. A parchment note from 1779 with an inscription written on a page made of human skin. It says,
"This is the skin of a white man taken by an Injun, scalped and skinned alive, belly cut out, tied to a bed of coals and roasted to death. The Injun from Ulysses used pale skin for money. Luke Swatland of Wyoming, September 13th, 1779.
Can you guess which one is really made from human skin? When these two items were tested, they found that Anatomy, Epitomized and Illustrated was in fact bound in human skin. Whereas the Swatland note was fake. It's cowhide. In that note on cowhide, just the idea of human skin was weaponized and used to reinforce fears and biases. Native Americans stealing white skin and using it as money. This same weaponization and wild rumors come up again with alleged books and items from the French Revolution. With so many corpses piling up from the jaws of the guillotine, stories spread that there were multitudes, whole libraries of books being bound in all this human skin for the pleasure of Republican generals and the new aristocracy. Chateau de Meudon, between Paris and Versailles, was long rumored to be the executed human skin tanning factory of the Revolution. And it wasn't just books. Rumor was clothing items like culottes were being tanned and fashioned out of the same bodies.
I heard you like the skin on your legs, so I made you pants of skin for your skin.
But much like the outrageous claims of the Swatland note, scientists have yet to test a book from the era of the French Revolution that actually turns out to have been bound in human skin. Twice now, I've mentioned these alleged skin books were tested. Whose job is that? Oh. We know her? Of course we do.
My name is Megan Rosenbloom, author of Dark Archives and member of the Anthropodermic Book Project. Our aim is to identify and test as many alleged human skin books as possible.
How many books have you tested?
We've tested 31 so far, although we believe there to be at least 50 in public institutions and more owned by private collectors.
How do you go about testing an alleged human skin book?
Sometimes we send a kit to institutions to collect their samples for testing, but sometimes I go collect it myself. Usually it's a special collections room or conservation lab at a library or museum. They have the book in question waiting for you and various staff watching you closely. I take out my scalpel or some sharp tweezers and hold my breath and try to extract the smallest portion possible from the book's leather. If the flake is large enough to see with a human eye, it's large enough to be tested. I am by all accounts a klutz, so this part makes me nervous.
Wait, if you're such a klutz, why would this be your job?
Well, we don't have a lot of people lining up to test human skin books.
That's fair. Continue.
I deposit the tiny flakes of leather into plastic tubes, label them, and send them to the chemist on my team for testing.
Is this DNA testing that your team is doing?
Age and the process of tanning leather actually destroys much of the human DNA. The age of these objects doesn't help much either. So we use a process called peptide mass fingerprinting. Different animals have different protein markers, so we can tell if a book is cow, pig, or human.
What percentage of the books you test end up being real?
A little more than half, about 60%.
Okay, if it's not French revolutionaries, who is making these real human skin books that still exist?
Doctors.
Doctors! Yikes.
How about a free examination?
In the 19th century, when most of these books, the real ones, were being made, medical education was being codified with new requirements for students to study and dissect human cadavers. Having real cadavers on the dissection table led to massive advances in our understanding of the human body. But it also meant that the dead were seen as a product, a learning tool, less than human. At the same time, books were viewed as real status items to be collected and admired, especially by doctors. So doctors love books, and doctors have access to corpses, often poor, destitute, sometimes criminal corpses with no family or money. A match made in heaven. A match made somewhere. Megan tells us that it wasn't morbid collectors or weirdos who spearheaded anthropodermic bibliopagy. It was mostly physicians who were the customers and the practitioners.
Hello, Mr. Pancreas.
So it's not criminals and weirdos and dark magicians making these books, but do we find doctors even more threatening? Like, no, it hasn't been the Zodiac Killer haunting the streets and causing murder and mayhem. It's been Peppa Pig.
Am I going to collab with Peppa Pig? No.
That's scarier, right? A doctor is someone who's supposed to be the good guy, supporting us, healing us. But before we get too horrified, is binding books in human skin even a bad thing? Let's head to the bowels of a 19th century hospital and examine further. The year was 1868, and that's not surprising, because what you're about to hear, the most 19th century story ever. Not that I have to explain myself, but I'm not going to explain what this costume is. You're just gonna have to wait and see. A 28-year-old widow named Mary Lynch was admitted to Philadelphia General Hospital, formerly Philadelphia Almshouse. Built in 1731, it's been called a bettering house, or house of correction. But when it moved to Blockley Township, it became known to locals as Old Blockley, which really sounds like some dank, grimy London prison best spoken with a Cockney accent.
Which is spot on. Old Blockley wasn't that far off from a prison, governor.
That's my Dick Van Dyke Cockney.
The constable is responsible. Now how does that sound?
Which is to say, not Cockney. Old Blockley was a one-stop shop, almshouse, charity school, hospital, insane asylum, and general catch-all landing spot for the city's poor, sick, and mentally ill. Old Blockley was the perfect example of a mid to late 19th century move to stuff all of society's undesirables into one establishment, not in the name of punishment, but in the name of humanity, work, and reform. It was not a prison, but it was inspired by, and partially designed by, one of the men who designed the infamous Eastern State Penitentiary. Old Blockley, like many prisons of the time, was built to be a haven, but rapidly descended into hell. It was overcrowded, filthy, and lacking the very humanity it was founded to uplift. Around the time Mary Lynch would have been at Old Blockley, it was billed as one of the great municipal hospitals of the world. But a doctor who actually worked there described it like this.
The management of the insane department at the time of my service was devoid of medical knowledge and humanity as was possible. I have still vividly in my memory pictures of raving maniacs in straitjackets, strapped to their bedsteads, or the doomed lunatic was bound to a massive chair, his head supporting a capacious box of ice which, melting, poured its chilling contents down his person for hours together.
As I mentioned before, in this part of the 19th century, American medicine was making great strides forward, and Old Blockley became a teaching hospital of great reputation, largely due to the open access doctors and the public had to all manner of maladies. Up until 1860, several years before Mary's arrival, the public could pay $8 to see demonstrations on the sick and poor.
It was visited for the most part by sightseers, attracted by the same motives as one visits an exhibition of animals. The hallucinations and eccentricities of these poor god-smitten creatures were the subject of thoughtless sport. It was a burning shame on the good name of this Christian community.
Patients feared becoming clinical material, being poked, prodded, and tested upon in the name of learning and prestige. Ultimately, Old Blockley and similar institutions on the East Coast were where the poor, sick, and friendless could be swept away and forgotten if they became ill or jobless. So when Mary Lynch ended up at Old Blockley, it was a last resort. Suffering from tuberculosis, Mary was admitted on Wednesday, July 15, 1868. She was there at Old Blockley for 6 months, including a particularly hot, punishing summer. Mary did have some family that came to visit regularly, attempting to comfort her with gifts of food that included ham and bologna sandwiches. Unfortunately, nobody noticed that the meats had little white specks on them, indicative of a parasitic roundworm. So adding to her already dire situation, Mary contracted trichinosis on top of tuberculosis, adding another wasting disease that causes diarrhea, vomiting, fever, and abdominal pain. Mary Lynch succumbed to her diseases on January 16, 1869, weighing only 60 pounds at the time of her death. Mary's remains were set to be buried in an unmarked pauper's grave behind the hospital, but a 23-year-old doctor, John Stockton Huff, had a particular interest in trichinosis and autopsied her body. He found approximately 8 million cysts attributed to trichinosis. Because of this autopsy, Mary was the first ever confirmed case of trichinosis at the hospital. That's the kind of medical advancement and knowledge that autopsies provide. Arguably less necessary, by our modern standards, was Dr. Huff removing strips of skin from Mary's thighs during that autopsy and preserving them in urine in a chamber pot in his basement. After the urine had performed its preservative magic on Mary's skin, Huff gave the strips to a tanner to properly and fully leatherize. Fun fact, in leather preparation, which is essentially what this was, just using human flesh instead of pig or calf skin, urine has a long history of being used in the process. When Huff put Mary's skin in urine, the high pH not only broke down organic material, but also softened the skin. Creating the light, thin skins for bookbinding was a messy business in general. A common initial step was steeping the skins in dog excrement or pigeon droppings. The enzymes would remove grease, blood, and rotting matter from the skin. The excrement also made the leather more flexible. Since steeping the flesh in dog excrement was called puring in Victorian London, pure finders were people who gathered dog droppings in a bucket to then sell them to tanneries.
Yeah, so that's my costume.
I present now an English pure finder's song. I don't know the melody, so I'm just gonna go for it.
I am an old pure finder. When folks say, how do you do? Says I, well, I do, and do well, don't you? I do so well when the do I do sell, but could do better if the do didn't smell.
Now how does that sound?
It's very important for me to be taken seriously as an intellectual, so I hope you didn't laugh at that. Fast forward over a decade later. Dr. Huff has developed a real interest in women's health and texts about women's reproductive health. And so he used Mary's skin out of the old chamber pot to bind 3 of his favorite medical texts. Remember those books we met at the Historical Medical Library in Philadelphia? 3 of them are bound in Mary Lynch. Speculations on the Mode and Appearances of Impregnation in the Human Female by Robert Cooper. Les nouvelles découvertes sur toutes les parties principales de l'homme et de la femme by Louis Ball. Recueil de secrets de Louise Bourgeois by Louise Bourgeois. Which one of these would you say is your favorite?
I would probably have to say the Cooper.
That makes sense because this is the one that also has this wild note inside the cover, which reads, "The leather with which this book is bound was tanned from the skin of the thigh of Mary L. Tanned in a pot de chambre by J.S.H. at the Philadelphia Hospital, January 1869. Book bound in Trenton, New Jersey, March 1884. Mary L. was Irish, widow, aged 28 years, died January 16, 1869. John Stockton Huff, April 2nd, 1884.
As a librarian, I love a reason to research, and this gives you so much information to start with. It gives you a name, it gives you a place, it gives you a date, and it's so much to work from. And again, that's how we got so much genealogical research done.
And it was because of that reference to Mary L. that the library was able to do this research.
Yes, the former college librarian, Beth Lander, went to the Philadelphia City Archives and researched for a Mary L. And it turns out that with that date, which was just one day off, she was able to find her and just using that one date and Mary L. And again, this tells you who this person is. It's not just, ooh, a book bound in human skin. This is a person. And that's how we refer to these books colloquially in the library. We don't just say, hey, we're going to bring out the books. We say, oh, we'll use the Marys, we'll use the John, we'll use the Lady Soldier. And we try to, amongst ourselves, give them a sense of personhood, if that's a word, and just acknowledge that these are people and treat them as such.
It's impressive how the librarians at the Historical Medical Library care for these books. But can possessing human skin books, even if you treat them with mindfulness and respect, ever be ethical? Some people argue it can't. In 2014, the Houghton Library at Harvard University announced via their blog that peptide mass fingerprint testing revealed that a book in their possession, De Destinée de l'âme by French writer Armand Housset, was in fact bound in real human skin. Their choice of words for the announcement was good news for fans of anthropodermic bibliophagy, bibliomaniacs, and cannibals alike.
Oh, wow. Someone needs a new social media manager. Cancel the library at Harvard. Hand clap emoji, hand clap emoji.
Listen, I wouldn't have gone with the cannibal joke, but who am I to judge using a little humor in explaining a difficult topic?
Well, I do.
I also understand the library's enthusiasm for this discovery, the scientific confirmation of something long suspected since the book arrived in their care in the 1930s. But there was someone who was not amused or pleased. That someone was rare book librarian at Princeton University, Paul Needham, who found the wording of the announcement shocking in its crudity. However, it isn't just the flippant wording Needham objected to. It's his argument that the human skin covering the book is the result of, quote, post-mortem rape.
That escalated extremely quickly.
In the case of the Harvard Skin book, the story is that the author wrote the book in the throes of grief after the death of his wife. He presented a copy of the book to a friend of his, Dr. Ludovic Bouland, who in turn had the book bound with some back skin of a nameless French woman, skin that he had just been holding on to for a rainy day. As one does. Bouland's reasoning for doing this was that a book that so perfectly captures the human soul should also be wearing human skin. Paul Needham argues in his A Binding of Human Skin in the Houghton Library, a recommendation, that Dr. Bouland excoriated the body of an indigent female mental patient. Needham believes that Dr. Bouland was absolutely intentional when selecting a woman's skin in the binding of the book, and said, I do consider that an attack on a female dead body, as the skin of a male would not have fulfilled his psychosexual needs in the same way. Needham considers keeping the skin book at Harvard akin to exhibiting the remains of Sarki Bartman, a 19th century South African woman we've talked about here before, who was exploited both in life as the Hottentot Venus, and then again in death, when her remains were dissected, plaster casted, preserved, and displayed against her wishes at the Musée de l'Homme in Paris. Given all this, Needham advocates that the skin should be removed from the book and given a proper burial. What we have here is what's known in the field of academia as
a tough one. A toughie. The old gray area.
No matter how you regard anthropodermic bibliophagy, a term, by the way, that Needham thinks sanitizes what skin books really are, consent, or the lack of consent, must always be the main focus of the story. Yes, there are stories of people who did consent to having their skin used, even wanted it to happen. But most died having no idea what was to come. When we lose sight of this or stop caring about it, we aren't telling the whole story of these books. But does that mean that all human skin bindings should be dismantled and buried somewhere, wiped out of libraries and arbitrarily put in the ground? I'm not sure that's the answer either.
Well, I don't really have a good answer for you, but what I can say is that by showing and treating and talking about these books, we're able to foster really rich conversations about consent that may not have ever happened. These books are concrete items that people can relate to in the context of their own personal experience. And what I see as my job as a library director is to advocate and to care for these books in the best way that I can, to advocate for their physical state, to advocate a sense of understanding for this person's experience, and to try to display them in a kind, caring, contextual manner for education.
When someone dies, they can donate their entire body to science, like to a medical school. They can also donate just their organs, or they can donate just their skin or parts of their skin, making a tissue donation. But that small skin donation, while noble, wouldn't be considered them. If you donated some of your mother's tissue after she died and then had her cremated, you wouldn't say she had been donated to science, you would say she had been cremated. Now, some cultures may feel differently, but in the majority of Western culture, her humanity wouldn't be voided by that missing piece of flesh. Mary Lynch's thigh skin, though not an ideal or humane situation, and no part of her life was an ideal or humane situation, is now being lovingly stewarded. If to bury someone properly is to memorialize them, give them respect and care, then to the best of our ability now, skin books like those at the Mutter are being given just that. Where I most strongly disagree with Needham, though I take and respect his point, is that skin books are not comparable to Sarki Bartman, whose organs and genitals were horribly cut out, mutilated, and preserved, her skeleton put on display as an exhibit. These human skin books, the ones that have been tested and confirmed, as well as those alleged human skin books that can't be tested because the institutions don't want Paul Needham at their door, don't want that smoke, all will continue to be controversial. We were speaking to University about coming to see their skin books for this video.
It's not a prestigious American university without a skin book, as they say.
And they kind of agreed, and then were like,
we don't think it's the right fit.
And part of me is sad that they want to hide the books away, but I also get it. I have sympathy for it. They may not want the attention or controversy, especially since no one currently caring for the books now was around when they were made or even acquired. So I'll leave you with this today. Do we keep skin books as artifacts? Teach the controversy. Teach the changing understanding of postmortem consent and medical ethics. Or do we bury? Put them in the ground as the human remains they really are. I've told you my thoughts, but don't take my word for it. Thank you to our delicious, wonderful patrons who make these videos and all the travel and editing and research that goes into them possible.
Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. To know and ways to grow, a It's in a book, a reading